we don't have that many high performance teams is we move people quickly. They
Mm.
don't have time to gel. The best teams I ever saw were on offshore platforms who'd worked together for 10 or 15 years. They could read each other's minds, but we're always moving people around and all that. And my major professor at University of Texas, who's an industrial psychologist, and he said, if you have a 7 or 8 person team and one person leaves and somebody else comes in, you've got not totally new dynamics, but
Yeah.
pretty new dynamics. That's part of the problem is not problem, but as you move people along, they got to kind of start over again.
You are listening to the 5 a.m. podcast, and today is your day. Welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast. I'm your host, Michael Klassen. And now, while the rest of the world might be hitting that snooze button, you are getting ready to get an edge on your day. Now, before we dive deep in today's conversation, I have a quick favor to ask. If you could be so kind as to make sure that you subscribe, share, and follow the 5 a.m. podcast. Share it with a friend or a colleague. I'm sure many are going to enjoy and, dare I say, profit from today's conversation. And you're helping this community grow. And we hope that we can all be world changers together. Now, our guest today knows exactly what it takes to change a world, specifically the world of work. Dr. Kevin Lewis is an organization development consultant and executive coach with 30 years of experience helping leaders navigate that messy, complex reality of human beings and human systems and assets and resources. He holds a doctorate from UT Austin and is the Amazon best-selling author of Teams, Tools, and Trials. From surviving massive corporate layoffs to consulting across Europe, Asia, and South America, Kevin helps people realize when they are a square peg in a round hole and how to build teams that actually perform. So, Kevin Lewis, welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast.
Thanks. Now I know why I'm so tired.
Yeah.
You explained all that stuff. Now I know why. Yeah.
Yes. Well, a life well lived that has many pages yet to be written.
Hopefully.
That's for sure. Now, Kevin, you mentioned being in the same job for 9 years, fearing that you would rot there because you were too good to promote. I know the feeling. And for our listeners feeling stuck in that same competency trap today, what was that internal catalyst that really moved you from stagnation to pursuing a doctorate at 35?
I think, Michael, I love the introduction. Thank you. I think part of it was frustration that I couldn't go anywhere geographically in the part of Chevron that I was in at that time, and I had to move, which is fine. But and my boss was not supportive. Now, Chevron, like many large companies, have an educational refund, tuition reimbursement deal and so they paid for 75% of my PhD, which was great. It was a blessing. But the very first class I was going to take, my boss at the time, he was very reluctant to sign the form and all this stuff. And I thought, is this your money? What? And it wasn't really the money. It was control. And he didn't want me to leave because I make him look good. Right. And that was the first time it kind of hit me. A, and then B, we had a lot of external consultants who I brought in, a lot of just more training, technical writing and communication skills, negotiation, that kind of stuff. And at the time I was signing their invoices, and this is in the 80s, $1,000 a day, $1,500 a day. In today's dollars, $4 or $5 grand a day. And I thought, hey, these people are no sharper than I am. I got to get in on this thing, So part of it was that motivation. So those were the two things.
Right. Now, and before you went to Chevron, you were actually working in the nonprofit sector and in New Orleans, correct?
Yes. Actually, it started in Miami. I grew up in South Florida, and it's an interesting story. My uncle, who lived in Dallas, was the chief science writer for the American Heart Association, and they had a big conference in Miami back when I was out of grad school. And I met his boss, and he said, I'd love to hire you, but you need some experience. So I went knocking on nonprofit doors. So for about a year and a half, I worked at the Multiple Sclerosis Society, the Miami chapter. And then I got a call from the Heart Association people, and it was an opening in New Orleans, a very similar job. So then I moved to New Orleans and did that. So 2 nonprofits back to back.
Right. And so was there maybe some formative or foundational things that you learned in that nonprofit sector that kind of helped you through the corporate world?
You know, Not really. I had really, during college, I worked at the Miami Herald in selling advertising space, large corporation, Knight Ridder. And I sunk my teeth on that. I was
Right.
18 years old, getting thrown out of people's offices, at that time, like many back then, people actually read newspapers, and it was the
Hmm.
Miami Herald or the Miami News. They owned both newspapers. I
Hmm.
go into some ad place and they say, "I hate the Miami Herald. Get the hell out of my office," with some I mean, so I had
Yeah.
pretty thick skin. I couldn't wait to about to college. That was like a vacation compared to that.
Yeah.
So I had a corporate background at a tender age. The nonprofit really made me appreciate how hard those people work and how little money they make doing
Right.
good work. That was the
Yeah.
main thing I learned there.
Yes. And your goal really was to get on with Chevron,
Well, it wasn't
wasn't it?
it was anybody, because
Okay.
I knew I had 2 nonprofits back to back, and I said, "Man, if I stay here much longer, I'm gonna be pigeonholed." So, to tell you the story, which you know about, so one day and I looked around New Orleans and I said, "Well, who's doing well here in this city?"
Hmm.
People who grew up with money and people who worked for oil companies. So, I didn't grow up with money. My parents were teachers, great folks, no issues there. But one day, 2 Chevron safety engineers came into my office and they said, "We need your help." I said, "What?" He goes, "We need to get the guys offshore on platforms, CPR training." And it was only men. There were not women offshore back then. And I said, "I'd be happy to set up some training for you guys. I have one condition." And they said, "What?" I said, "I want to meet the head of human resources." Back there it was personnel. That's how old
Hmm.
I am.
Yeah.
So one thing led to another. I took the course. This guy, Ben, he was head of HR. He came up and "Are you interested in us?" I said, "Yeah, blah, blah, blah." Interviewed for a job, thought I had it. It fell through. An internal candidate came in. And as I said to you in an earlier note, I said, I got mad at God. I said, okay, I thought I had this. That is not good. So then I went kind of to the dark side. I bumped into a buddy of mine I went to Florida State for my master's, mass communication. I bumped into this guy at a bar, in New Orleans. And he walked in with 2 really pretty ladies and they had these giant cigarette packs, Winston, Camel, whatever, doing a promotion. And I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I work for this company out of Chicago. We just go around the country and give away free booze and cigarettes." Now I'm like 24 years old. I'm thinking, that sounds like fun. So kind of really not the smartest decision I ever made in my life. And it really, it put me on a different path for a while. And thankfully I came back. But anyway, so here's what I say funny. For a year and a half at heart, I saved people's lives. Then for a year and a half, I killed them. So maybe that evens out. I don't know.
Yeah. Yes. There's some scales there that are swinging in the balance, that's for sure. And now, what was it? Was it just the money, or was it the opportunity to advance that made Chevron attractive to you in
Well,
those
it's a big
early
oil
years?
company,
Yeah.
so, I mean ironically, I grew up buying Chevron gas, and it was always more expensive than anybody else's. My
Mm.
dad would say, "Why are you going to that gas station? How can they charge 10 cents more?" But I would have worked for BP, Amoco,
Right.
Gulf, whatever. They would happen to be the ones who showed up, but it was such a blessing because they have a very good culture. It's a great company. I still have lots of friends there. And I worked there 18 and a half years. Then I got laid off, which is a whole nother conversation.
Yes. And there, then also, was it because of the layoff that you got into coaching?
Well, here's the deal. I was what's called a regional training coordinator. So a little backstory. There were around 2,000 employees in that region. Offshore platforms, probably two-thirds of the employees are offshore. The other third were in New Orleans offices. Uh, so at that time, the World War II guys were retiring, and then they were hiring people in the 80s, to take over. So there was a huge gap, knowledge transfer, that
Mm.
kind of thing. So they had to become there was no formal real training. People just would figure stuff out. They said, we got to get our game a little bit together. So I coordinated all that training. But Michael, I got frustrated because we spent all this money, I mean, a lot of money on external consultants and all this to change people's behavior, leadership skills. Nothing was really working that much because I would measure the impact. I would do this,
Mm.
and I thought, and I'm a social scientist now, but back then I was thinking, why are things not changing? So I was very intrigued around all that. So that planted the seed. And
Right.
also, when I was, I always enjoyed the college campus. I always thought about getting a PhD, and so one thing led to another. And I said, since these guys are going to leave me here till I rot, I'll get my PhD, I'll leave Chevron and go into consulting or do whatever. And now that
Hmm.
didn't happen because I ended up, staying with Chevron, moving to Houston. But that's, again, another conversation.
Right. Yeah, fascinating. Now, from my research and doing the reading and looking into what we were going to talk about today, I discovered that you had clients tell you, "Well, you saved my career." Usually, that probably involves some hard truth. What are some of those telltale signs that someone might be in the wrong job versus just having a bad week?
That's a great question. It could be two or three different things. A lot of times engineers, now in big corporations, usually you have a dual track. If you're a techie, IT engineer, whatever, you could take the technical track or you could take the managerial track. But there's a heck of a lot more managerial jobs than there are that technical track. In fact, Chevron has a thing called fellows. And they're like
Mm,
the guru in geochemistry or the guru in petroleum engineering, but there's only a handful of jobs there. So most of them have to go the managerial track to make more money. And some of them are really good at it. Some of them just miss the engineering work terribly, and they don't do a very good job. So then you have to develop them. You know,
mhm.
some leaders are born, but most are made.
Yes. Yeah. That's right. And we could talk about self-made men, self-made women, but really most leaders, like you say, are trained to be there and to get there. And now I want to ask you that about that reality of teams and leadership. You stated that high performance teams can be rare. And in your 30 years of observation, was there maybe a top of the chart silent killer that maybe prevents a good team from becoming a great one?
You're going to laugh at this because it's a very simple answer.
Okay.
The reason we don't have that many high performance teams is we move to people quickly. They
Mm,
don't have time to gel,
yeah.
you know? And the best teams I ever saw were on offshore platforms who'd worked together for 10 or 15 years. They could read each other's minds, but we're always moving people around and all that. And my major professor at University of Texas, who's an industrial psychologist, and he said, if you have a 7 or 8 person team and one person leaves and somebody else comes in, you've got not totally new dynamics, but
Yeah.
pretty new dynamics.
Yes.
So that's part of the problem is not problem, but as you move people along, they got to kind of start over again in a way.
Right. Yeah, when I was in college, I was being a crew supervisor and having people under me, and that really was how my brain worked. And I know even years later, my father-in-law remarked to his daughter, and he had worked in government his whole career. He said, "Boy, Michael is really good at putting teams together." But when I was in college and I was supervising my crews that I had, we were changing oil on cars and going to school full time, working full time. We had a phenomenal team that had gelled together. But because we were such a high performing team in amongst all the franchises within our city, there's probably 8 shops that belong to the same company. They were always taking my guys or gals away, and then we'd have to absorb somebody new. And eventually, I was still there, but maybe I had 3 or 4 of what used to be 9 people,
Mhm.
that we worked together on, and we felt like our team was constantly being dismantled. Is there something that you could say to, people above the supervisors about the importance of keeping those teams together and maybe not removing pieces, but duplicating?
You know, I don't know if that's really necessary. I think the world is so dynamic now.
Mm.
You can't do that. But and I'll answer your question in a second. But I want to ask you a question. Why do you think your team was so good? Was it your model? Were you just lucky? What your leadership? What do you think it was?
Well, growing up on a farm, I had been taught about the importance of community and teams and responsibility. And I just brought that as I was working my way through this company. And I felt it was the relationship that we built. And one of the things that I would tell the guys and the gals that were there, um, uh, I realize we are paid by the hour, but this is your responsibility. If you need help, we'll help you, but this is what you have to do, and we're going to support you to get it done, and you're going to support us to get done what we have to get done. And I think it was building that sense of camaraderie amongst the group.
So they were lucky they had somebody. I mean, this is just common sense. So what a lot of people do when they do team building or team alignment is they'll use tools like Myers-Briggs
Oh,
type
yes.
indicators, strength finders, DISC, and all that stuff. And I've used all those tools. There's nothing wrong with them. But I think they're missing the boat. It's like, do you really want to say, I'm an ENFP, you're an
Mhm.
ISTJ, blah, 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 blah. It just confuses people. So out of frustration with teams, and this will answer your question,
Yes.
about 20 years ago, I put together a model. It's called the team triangle model. Okay. And basically, what teams want to know is what's the clarity on task? But this is the what, this is the who, this is the how. Okay.
Wow.
And it's
Okay.
exactly what you were saying.
Yeah.
So what I do is I say, what's the purpose of the team? What are we trying to accomplish? Who's going to do this piece of it? Be very clear on roles. And what's our internal process for bringing in new team members, for making decisions, this kind of stuff. So
Mhm.
instead of this touchy-feely trust falls, let's go build on a sailboat. That's all fun, but can we get to the heart of the matter? I'm very surgical about this stuff. So I think that's a big part of it, is that they're not clear on what we're trying to do. They kind of forget sometimes. They're not sure who's supposed to do what. And when do I have to share my work with somebody else? What can I do alone? Right?
Right.
All those kinds of things.
Yeah. Yes, and that communication, and of course, you mentioned that trust falls, and people's, I don't know if they're spending good money after bad, but when is team building actually maybe a waste of money versus a benefit?
I have a great example of that. Okay. And
Okay.
I work a lot with leadership teams, C-suite and all this stuff. And I had to work up the food chain. I had to get some gray hair and be old to
Yeah.
get credibility, right? But this is a great example. So about 10 years ago, I had a chief information officer, a young lady, very sharp, and she had 7 people on her team. It was a leadership team. And she called me, she goes, and I knew her from something else. And she said, hey, I think I need some team building. And when someone says that, it's always red flag. Woo,
Yeah.
okay, really?
Yeah.
Or my people need training. Those are the 2 red flags. Okay. And sometimes they do, but many times they don't. So I sat down with her. I said, so how many direct reports? She goes, oh, I have 7. I said, okay, talk me through. And we went through each one. And actually 5 of them were doing pretty well. It was 2 people. Oh, okay. And I said, her name was Annie. I said, Annie, we don't want to drag the whole team through team building. It's like, I'm not going to punish the first grade class because 2 kids are acting out, right?
Hmm.
So I said, why don't we do this? Let me work with them individually. And I use a tool called the Berkman method. It's based here in Houston. It's been all over the world. But basically what we did was I did a feedback session with her so she'd see the tool. And then I compared these 2 people who were not getting along very well. And it was very clear they were like nitro and glycerin. And I can't get into too many details, it would take too long, but basically I sat down with them and I said, individually, one was in Australia, one was in here in Texas. And I said, look, I'm your friend. I'm your internal consultant. I don't want you to get punished, but if you guys don't get your act together, you're going to be on the PIP, which is the performance improvement plan. And
Oh,
in a big company, when you go on a PIP, about a year later, if there's layoffs, the people who first go who were on PIPs. So I showed them 2 or 3 key things they could do where they were getting twisted off, and they turned it around just like that. So it's a great example of don't drag the whole team into team building. If you got 1 or 2 people having issues, go surgically. But a lot of consultants, they kind of like team building. It makes more money. Hey, let's do team building. And to me, it's stupid
right.
sometimes.
Yes. And now I wanted to ask you, of course, we have a wide range of employed, self-employed entrepreneurs who listen to the show. Um, is there this transition from being the kind of like doing to actually leading, and can that kind of shake some leaders up when they have to change those 2 roles?
It's incredibly difficult for that because what's the work? If you're an accounting firm and they need to get somebody leaves, they take the best accountant and he or she becomes the lead,
Hmm.
or they take the best engineer, the best software developer. And a lot of times, you know, they don't want to be the supervisor.
Right.
They want to keep doing their thing, especially if they love what they do, and
Hmm.
they don't get any training, and they're kind of wandering in the mist. So especially with engineers, I worked with so many engineers over the years. I tell them, I say, okay, I know you took the job. You're moving up the food chain. You want to be a manager. You got to pay your dues. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I really miss the engineering. So what I'll say to them is, okay, tell your team that you still love your engineering. Don't take away work from anybody, but maybe pick one project a quarter or a year to keep your hand in. Cherry pick it. Don't take it away from somebody. Maybe it comes earned and say, hey guys, I'm really good at metallurgy analysis. That was kind of my subject matter expertise. I know, Fred, you're pretty good at that too, but I really would like to at least maybe be a peer assist or can I help? Because I just got to keep my fix. And they're going to respect that for a
Hmm.
couple of reasons. They're fellow engineers, right?
Yeah.
A and B, he or she didn't just take it. You kind of negotiated with the team. And then over time, gradually they can winnow that out a little bit and hopefully get their jollies by developing people and mentoring more than
Hmm.
doing it itself. But some of them are always going to want to do it. So you have to just realize that.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned the word mentoring. Bill Gray is a guest who's been on 5 a.m. podcast. His whole career almost has been in mentoring, and he taught it in university, worked for Shell, Eastman Kodak, other companies like that. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the right way to have that mentor protege relationship, and maybe is there a less effective wrong way?
Well, the first thing is to try to match them,
Mm.
so that they'll actually get along. You can't always have that luxury. But in big corporations, there's software things you can do. You can meet them one on one. You have to be careful with male female stuff for the
Hmm.
obvious reasons, right?
Yep.
Got to be real careful there. And And there are models and tools for doing that, how to do it, how not to do it, starting out kind of slowly. The big issue with the mentor, if they're new, is not to kind of just try to take the work themselves.
Mm.
And, but I find people, this is another good example. So we had a lot of issues, again, a Chevron example. And I worked there for a long time, but I also worked externally. I consulted with Dell Computer, Bristol Myers Squibb, Honeywell a
Mm.
lot, but obviously I have a lot of Chevron examples. But
Right.
what I discovered was I did a little study for when you have expats who go around the world and they make a lot of money, right?
Hmm.
One of the things they're supposed to do at almost any company, Coca-Cola, IBM, whatever, Chevron, is that you're supposed to train the nationals, who the Nigerians, the Venezuelans, who whatever they are. And the theory is the expat trains them and mentors them so well, you don't need the expat anymore, and they take over their job. So that's almost like, do I really want to do that? I got a pretty good gig right here. Why
Yeah.
would I want this guy? Because I'm making a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. And I did. I was frustrated because I kept hearing people saying, oh, we got terrible. They're not very good, these mentors overseas. So I found 8 of them scouring the world. And I asked them, why are you so good at a mentor? And some of them grew up kind of like a citizen of the world. One guy
Mm.
said, my parents would always celebrate like Bastille Day or Boxing Day or, something was out of their culture, Cinco de Mayo, whatever. And we grew up just traveling internationally. So they almost felt like that was just what they loved to do. So they're almost like kind of born for it. And others, again, have to be taught. If you're going to go to another culture, pick a sport,
Mm.
soccer, buy a jersey, drink the mate, ask people, you have to get into the culture to really do it. So that's a long answer for that one.
Thanks for watching the show. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com. 5am Podcast is brought to you in part by mkci.ca, a certified member of the Autodesk Developer Network. MKCI helps companies maximize their AutoCAD, Inventor, Navisworks, and other design software investments. Their innovative products like the CommandSys script editor and the Clash Management Suite will streamline your workflow and boost your productivity. Visit mkci.ca today to discover how they can enhance your competitive CAD advantage. That's mkci.ca. Thank you for your support of 5am Podcast. Absolutely. And that's actually one of the things that Bill talked about when he was on 5am Podcast is helping Shell, who I think they were in Borneo and they had their expats and they were trying to do exactly what you were describing with the locals and train them up. And yeah, I can imagine that cultural difference is just a part of it.
It
And
is.
then,
I have
yeah.
of actually a model in my book about that, about, why do some do it and some don't. And
Mhm.
yeah, and there are some little tricks to it. First of all, I'm a history nut. So I would read about the country. I would look at the culture, try to pick
Mhm.
up the language a little bit, do some of the cool, like pick team, whether it's soccer or cricket or whatever, go to
Yeah.
the games, try the experiment with the food. But you know what? These guys, they're working their butts off. Okay. And the biggest predictor, there may be men, there are plenty of women now too, but mainly men. And the biggest predictor for success, if you're an expat, is the trailing spouse.
Oh, is that
If
right?
mom is not happy, nobody's going to be happy, right?
Wow.
I have a friend, Victoria Stage, her PhD, she's still at Chevron. Her doctorate was on that around
Wow.
expat, success. And that's the number one predictor to success or not, the trailing
Wow.
spouse.
Wow. Fascinating stuff. Now, the other part of organizations is often they have to shed staff and it might, in multiples of percentage, 20, 30, 50%. And then you get this survival guilt among those that have lost their work family. And that can be paralyzing. How do you begin to rebuild that trust and culture when the foundation is shaken so badly
Yeah,
like that?
it's a great question because so after the 9 years in New Orleans, when I came to Houston, a promotion, it was a technology company that merged with four other Chevron technology companies, and we had 50% cuts. So we had
Wow.
we had 800 people in Houston and Calgary, as a matter of fact. They had 800 in LA, and then they merged to 1,600. And a year later, we're back to 800. Now, even the journalism majors, that would be me, that's a 50% cut. So I can do that math, right?
Yeah.
So the issue is mainly how did that process go? The people who get taken out, the survivors, the employees who are still there, are watching how those people were treated. And
Yeah.
they infer from that, how worthy am I to the organization? Okay. So if you treat them like a criminal, where you make them, you take the laptop, you take your badge, you kick them out, that kind of thing. Now,
Yes.
from a security standpoint, you have to do that sometimes. I understand that, but there are ways to do that a little more humanely. So how you do it for the organization system is huge, but also what support did those people get? And then, but what support is for the survivors? And I did something and I wrote it in my book. It's pretty interesting. I got so frustrated about 6 months after the layoffs. Our survivors, the employees still there, were just in a malaise. They were just down in the dumps. They were guilty because they didn't get
Mhm.
taken out. They were afraid they would happen another year or two, this kind of thing, right? Uh, so I did some research, and David Noor, the guy who came up with Layoff Survivor Syndrome, he written
Mhm.
a book, and I went to a workshop. Basically, what I did was I scoured the people who had left through contacts, and I said, I kept hearing rumors. Oh, Judy and Fred, they're under a bridge at I-10. They're homeless. And I thought, that's BS. I don't buy that. So we factually found out how they were doing. So I had them come back. I did a panel. All right. Now get this. I went to our managers and I said, our survivors are, and the book was floating around. They knew what I was talking about. They're in a bad mood. That's why they're not productive. I said, I want to bring people back to see what their
Hmm.
stories were. And manager said, no, you can't do that. I said, why? Oh, they'll go postal, blah, blah, blah. And I said, come on, we got security. I did it anyway. I don't care. I just did it. I brought him in and, I should have I have my coffee mug too with my book on it. I should have
Oh,
showed it to you. I just saw yours. Anyway, we brought four people back. One who maybe just retired, one who got another job with an oil company. We got one who, change industries. A lot of the geophysical people went to medical stuff because of the
oh,
technology.
interesting.
And then somebody started a business, their own business. And it was about 6 months, 9 months later. And it was a career development thing for the survivors. And so these people came back, and I had three questions on a flip chart. What did you do at Chevron? What are you doing now? And describe your journey and the ups and downs. And I'll tell you right now, God was in the room. All right.
Hmm.
Of everything I've ever done in consulting in 30 years, it was the only one I did perfectly
Wow.
because I think the Holy Spirit was just coming through. It was amazing because Michael, the survivors, they saw these people initially, they felt sorry for them. Oh yeah, they got fired. And then after about 20 minutes of conversations, the ups and downs, they were kind of in awe. And at the end, they were jealous. they ki-
Yeah.
they were kind of ready to go do it themselves. It was insane, but it was really powerful.
Wow. And that's it's wonderful to be able to combat the lies and the fear with reality. I
And
know
it was the
there's a
first time they'd ever come back, you
yeah.
know? I mean, let's think that. You worked there for years and you come back
Mhm.
and it was powerful, it really was.
Yes. Well, and so even what the Bible or Stoic philosophy, things like that, of talking about how things we fear are not even close in reality to the reality of what we think we have to be afraid of and concerned about. Now, one of the things that comes along with layoffs or after layoffs, as has been said, you go bankrupt slowly and then all of a sudden. And you've worked with organizations that were clearly going under. How does that high potential employee stay positive without being disillusioned about the ship sinking?
Well, I think part of it's the faith.
Mm,
I have faith, and I had seen ups and downs and layoffs and all that stuff. And so part of that's kind of, if you don't have that, I don't know how they do it.
mhm,
I think what they do is try to find examples where people have done better. And there's life after any organization. Okay. It's
mhm,
easier with God. I'm sure it's not as easy without God, but anytime it's happened to me, it's been a blessing. So I think understanding that that's almost a reality because people get stuck. If it's all cushy, it's all good in the hood, and all of a sudden it's like, maybe you're just not really growing, that kind of thing. So
mhm,
I think learning those stories from other people and constantly, I don't want to say interviewing, but I tell people, and this is when I was at Chevron too, I told people, you need to have an internal game plan and you need to have an external game plan
hmm,
all the
mhm.
time, parallel.
Yeah.
So if you do get laid off, it becomes a nuisance. It's not a, you know, crisis.
Right. Yeah, nuisance is way better than crisis, that's for sure. And one of those things, as you say, nobody likes to change a wet baby. The baby doesn't even like it. What's the most effective way for a leader to present this diaper change to a resistant workforce?
Yeah, I'll get to that in a second, but I need to
Okay.
take that back a little bit. So the wet baby thing is a fun little thing to say.
Okay.
But the reality is, and I'm going to use the Berkman again, and I use a lot of different tools. I love the Hogan tools. There's all these 360 feedback tools, Center for Creative Leadership, but Berkman's one of my favorites because they have these different components, and one of them is around change management. Okay, it's called restlessness. So when people take this, there's like these 10 big components, but one of them is around change. They call it restlessness, which is like, do you like doing one thing at a time? Do you like juggling a lot of balls in the air? And about 45 to 50% of people really don't like to change. They want to stick to what they're doing. Leave me alone. Don't interrupt me. Let me do my thing. Okay. So that's about roughly 50%. But there's two other buckets. The other bucket is some people love change. They thrive on it. Okay. So don't think everybody hates change. Some people, the more the better. Now, within that group, there's a subset within those. Like the score is like 1 to 99. Mine's a 99. I get bored easily. I like juggling all that stuff going on. That's why I'm probably still alive
Hmm.
after retiring, right? Because
Yeah,
a lot of guys don't make it, frankly.
that's
Uh,
right.
but so that's the usual what I like, what I see, and what I enjoy doing. But there's something called a need score in this Berkman thing. And some people, their need score is also 99, meaning they want the organization to have a tsunami of changes. They like organizational imposed change. Not me, bro. Even though I'm 99 usual on the outside, my need score is like a 10. So what that means is I'm the change guy. I don't want your change. I want my change, right?
Yeah.
And if you put a change and I don't like it and you don't even tell me about it and you put it on without me talking, I get very mad. Okay. So that's understanding that model is really huge for organizations, right? So don't think everybody, I'll give you an example. I had a leader, he had this really high change score on a Berk. I did it for his whole team, leadership team. And he had like 6 or 7 direct reports, and every one of them had the low change score, and
Mm,
the leader had the high change score. And one of their complaints was we did a team thing using that model I was telling you about, Team Triangle. And every one of them said, Tim's always looking for new projects. We can't get the damn projects we're doing right now, and they keep coming on, blah, 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 blah. So we're at the workshop. I said, Tim, dude, you're killing your team. You got to back off, cherry pick these things. And then to the team, I said, he ain't changing. So you better realize you got to up your game a little bit. You got to, but at least they understood why. They had some
Right.
data, and instead of just being mad.
Yeah. And that information is key. One of my good friends, his mother was a lifelong politician, so he was constantly door knocking and learning all these things, hanging out at his mom's office. And he would one of the things he would talk to people about is the best decisions are made with the maximum amount of information. So how about I leave this pamphlet with you? And for staff, that information is good. Oftentimes we might not feel like not only are we in a silo, but the lights off and the people just feel like they're kept in the dark, or maybe they're a mushroom on a mushroom farm.
They are. And I heard a line from a guy a long time ago, I never forgot. When you push change down into an organization, some people push back and they get muscle.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's all in how the individual takes in the information and reacts and responds to it. I do want to ask you about your book, Teams, Tools, and Trials. And you write in there about relationship between that HR department where we might have to go tell the joke that we told at lunchtime. Hey, HR wants to hear that joke you told, to the line leaders. And it could be maybe there's historical friction, modern friction between those two. So how can they become allies instead of adversaries?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the funny part was when you start to write a book, I wanted to write the book, and you do the research, and people say get a very narrow target audience. If it's for everybody, it's for nobody. So
Mm,
reluctantly, I chose HR because I had to be under HR organizationally most of the time, not always. And it was very frustrating because these people were into benefits and comp and all that stuff. And, you know, I always hung out with my customers and loved them. And the HR people I often reported to were an impediment. I'd have to
mm,
educate them, and it was a big pain. Now, towards later, they got smarter, and I got probably more mature, and I could handle it. Uh, but my original audience for HR, I had a buddy who's a former CEO look at it for me, and he said, Kevin, there's a lot of leadership stuff in here. You need to expand your audience. So that's
mm,
why I do HR and line leaders. Okay. And
yeah,
it made it a more powerful book because like HR, if you want to step up your game, the reason there's this all the time,
yeah,
many HR people don't know anything about the business. If you don't fundamentally look, you were changing oil. What if you didn't even know how to use a wrench and you're trying to lead those people,
yeah. It'd be
right?
a problem.
You've got to know the business. And I'm talking intimately, and you have to know what their needs are. They're your internal customers. And this is true for any staff function, accounting, legal, whatever. Those people are making money,
Yeah,
not you. You're
right.
spending money, right?
Yeah,
So you got to understand the business. Now, on the leader side, I'll tell you, if you have an HR person who's a buddy and you reach out to them and explain the business, they can save your tail.
mm,
Sexual harassment,
yeah.
class action suits, all that kind of stuff can destroy an organization. So they do need each other, but there's definitely certainly adversarial.
Right. And something I just thought of as you were talking about, you made the brief reference to what I had my college job and pre-college of changing oil. I had become, I was probably there for 3.5 years. During my degree program, for sure I was there, but uh, I was in my second year, so I was going to college full time. I was working 40 hours a week. I was having great success, and I had built some good relationships within the organization. And they were like, Michael, what would it take to get you to drop out of your degree program and run a new store for us?
Mm,
And I was like, boy, that's and
tough one.
bonus structure. It was a tough one. I stuck with my studies, and I think my parents were both happy about that, but sad about it at the same time. But we make some of those pivotal decisions. Maybe we do have a great demographic of 18 to 24 that listen to 5 a.m. podcasts. Can you talk to that younger group that might be having some of those opportunities brought to them?
You know, after COVID, a college degree is just not as important as it used to be.
Mm,
It
mhm.
just isn't. And as a social scientist, I didn't think COVID was going to be that big of a deal. I was absolutely wrong. It changed everything. And one of my sons is 26. Okay. So
Okay.
he's right on that area. And now he has a degree in IT, which is good. The MIS actually. And, but getting these degrees for where you got to go to student loans and all this kind of stuff. If it's anything technical, I mean, look how the companies change their hiring practices. Don't need a
Mhm.
degree. Shoot, United Airlines has a whole like university to train new pilots because they're so hurting for pilots,
Wow.
right? You don't have to have a degree for that either. So
Mhm.
I'm not encouraging that. But look at Michael Dell. He's
Yeah.
the poster child for that. He was sitting there in his dorm room putting together computers, and his parents were going, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm making money." So now I have 3
Yeah.
degrees. I'm very thankful for it.
Right.
I have a daughter too. They all have degrees, and that's it. But I think I would really give that one some thought, especially micro, dirty jobs,
Yes.
welding. You know how
Yeah.
much welders make?
I do.
Plumbers. So I think
Yes.
those
So
new,
much.
exactly. I think those new jobs, you got to sit there and say, dude, if I can be a welder or a plumber or electrician especially, make
Mhm.
120 grand after about 2 or 3 years,
Yeah.
really, I can always go back to school. So I'd give that one
Yeah.
some thought.
Yes, and I know well, we live in ranching and oil country, and, there's quite a few welders around us that I mean, even 10 years ago, it was all oil field money, but it was $1,000 a day, and now it's probably 50% more
And it's
than that.
huge. The AI, they're going to build all these data centers and
Mm,
everything.
mhm.
You need construction people.
That's
I
right.
mean, it's like, hey, like I said, I love universities, but they haven't been really, how can I put this? They haven't been really good stewards of some of the
The
money they've been spending for a
Yes,
long time, especially the Ivy
that's right.
League ones, right?
Yeah, and we have, because where you have oil, you have natural gas, especially out here in the foothills.
Yep.
And so we're getting data centers out here. There's Bitcoin mining operations that are adjacent to gas plants that are just buying and making their own electricity with natural gas. And what a world. And I would say if I had a college age son and he told me, "Hey, they want to give me a store." I'd be like, "Dude, take the store. Just say shut up and take my money."
Especially electricians. Plumbers,
Yes.
pretty tough. You're lying
Yeah.
around the water. It's kind of, they make a
Uh-huh.
lot of money, but I mean, electrician,
Yeah.
commercial electrician, I'd go for that. And I'm not
Yes.
really handy with my hands. I think I'm in the right kind of thing, but boy, if you are at all, I would go for it.
Oh, yes, absolutely. There's so much opportunity. Now, I want to get to the story you were telling me about the cruise ship from New Orleans, but it's on a travel bent. So you have consulted in South America, Asia, Europe. Is there one leadership trait that you've seen was truly universal, regardless of culture or language?
Not really. I think being a good listener
Mm.
and not
Hmm.
being a pushy American
Yeah.
is the key thing, right? Okay. And like I know in the Asian culture, in fact, we just got back from Japan a couple
Hmm.
months ago, my whole family, and it was kind of fun. Indonesia, I did some work there internationally, but in some of the Asian cultures, they will say yes when they really mean no because they want to
Yes.
be polite.
Right.
So you got to be real careful. And you almost get the same thing with some of the Hispanic cultures.
Mm.
Super friendly people, the whole bit. So what I would say is if you're going in there to do consulting, whatever, I would get to the nearest expat or employee who's an American who's been there for a few years and say, okay, give me the scoop on this thing, the pre-work on that. Do your research on what are the nuances around these cultures, what to do, what not to do, gestures. I mean, it's different. I mean, I'll never forget it. I was in Rio de Janeiro, in Brazil, which was kind of a nice place because actually, you know, I lost my job at Chevron. I got really good at survivor stuff that
Mm.
I got taken out. Okay. Which is pretty amazing when you think about it. My whole department was eliminated. And then I worked for a energy software company as a director of change, and I taught at a university for a while. And then I got rehired
Mm.
7 years later. But so I had so much credibility in my second Chevron career because I had been laid off myself by Chevron. So
Right.
I would say to them, it's a good company. I would have been rehired or not, right?
Yes.
But the uh, the cultural stuff, I was going to say Rio. That was my first assignment
Mm.
when I got rehired, and it was like I'm in Rio on expenses. This is a fun place to be. It was really good. But as I walked in the office and all the hugging and kissing, hey, they're kissing on the cheek, the men and the women, all this kind of stuff. And I thought, man, in the States, that would not fly. I don't know about Canada,
Right.
but
No, not
you'd
at
be
all.
sitting in HR about 2 minutes later saying, "What are you doing?" So you have to just understand the culture and not be an ugly American or
Yes.
Canadian.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that. Now, you've noted that high potential employees are not necessarily high performers. So why does maybe corporate talent spotting get that so wrong?
Because I don't think they use any rigor in
Hmm,
identifying hypos in the first place. And
right.
there are tools I haven't used in this tool. I know there's one tool out there just for choosing a hypo. I don't know if it's any good or not,
Hmm.
but usually there's a social science term called homophily, which is lover of the same, which means if you walk into a conference with 100 people there and there's 5 people who are petroleum engineers or accountants, they're going to somehow get
Yeah.
together after 10 minutes. It's just
Yes.
birds of a feather flock together, right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of managers, they end up saying, oh, you went to Texas A&M, you're an Aggie? I'm an Aggie too. I got the ring. Let's make you
Yeah.
hypo, or
Right.
their criteria is real loosey goosey. So I actually proved this to myself. Uh, I used a tool called the 16 personality factor, 16PF, and I went to the Pascagoula refinery and they had a big hypo thing.
Okay.
And you're going to love this. So I went in there and I said, okay. And the HR manager, guy named Bobby Patton, great guy. He was kind of like me, like an OD guy. And I said, dude, I don't think we do a very good job choosing hypos. Let's do an experiment. He goes, what do you want to do? I said, I want you to show me 6 hypos that are in the refinery now. Give me 2 that you really do think are hypos. Give me 2 that you absolutely don't think they're hypos. And give me 2 you're not sure of. Okay. Don't tell me who's who. And we gave them a 16 personality factor instrument. It's kind of like the Berkman or the Hogan.
Hmm.
I did a feedback session with him. And then I picked one guy that I think this guy's a hypo. Now, the industrial psychologist for the company that did that, his name is Ralph Mortensen. He was in on it with me. I said, Ralph, it's going to be a fun thing. I sent him just the data, the 16 PF reports,
Okay.
and he looked at it, and he and I identified the one guy independently.
Wow.
The other people were sharp, don't get me wrong, but they weren't
Uh-huh.
really hypos.
Right.
So I think that the reason that they're not good performers is that they have a bad selection process.
Right.
And once a hypo, always a hypo. And this really bothers me, okay? You get this
Mm.
entitlement
Hmm.
thing. Oh, well, you're a hypo. Oh, yeah. They get the best overseas assignments. They get the best training. They get all this stuff. They're there 18 months. Then they get leave and someone else has to clean up their mess,
Yes.
right? They move them too quickly and they're not
Hmm.
choosing them very well. And in some companies, I know Schlumberger did this because I interviewed this guy. They're one of the few companies that you have to earn your way back in every
Mm.
year.
Wow.
It's
Okay.
not once a hypo, always a hypo. Okay. It's almost like if you're the Tom Brady or, a quarterback or even an NFL cheerleader, you got to work your way back in and
Yeah.
there's no guarantee. If companies did that, that would be
Hmm.
great. Because here's the other issue. How come they don't walk off the list? Somebody has to admit you made a mistake.
Hmm.
That's why they never get pulled back. It's like, well, Fred, why did you make this guy a hypo? He's not very good. Well, I don't know, man. So no one's going to admit that. So they just ride that wave as long as they can.
Right. Yes. And you have those, I think back to one of the television stations that I was working at, they would bring in new students, often hadn't just fresh out of college, trying to find a spot for them to fit. But also, sometimes I would see these people come in and management above me would not even see the diamond in the rough in somebody and
That's
wouldn't
a
give them a
great
chance.
point. We leave people in the dust. What if you're a late bloomer?
Yeah.
Not everybody's perfect at 23. I mean, so we get this entitlement and they take off and then we leave people. You talk about diversity.
Yeah.
Come on, give somebody a shot,
Right.
So that's a great point.
And I would see so many of these young people, they would leave because they weren't challenged enough. Such a wasted resource, like talented men and women that are just not being challenged.
Well, and some of them are lazy, frankly.
That's true.
Okay, not
Yeah.
many. I mean,
Management
really, but
too
that's what
included.
kind of irritates me with, in the U.S. where, actually we're kind of reducing the payroll a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I grew up, if you wanted to be in civil service, that was a way to get a decent job, lots
Yes.
of vacation, blah, blah, blah. Now they're making as much money as private sector, and these people were shocked. I've lost my job. Hey, work in energy for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody I know who live in Houston, and not all, some are medical, some are IT people, they've been laid off at least once or twice.
You'd find some guys that have like their W-4 or their tax slips, multiple, 3 or
Yeah.
4 in 1 year.
But you know what? What doesn't kill you makes you
That's
stronger,
right.
right? Nietzsche. I
Yes.
mean, it was the best thing for me because
Mm-hmm.
when I got taken out, I taught at Houston Baptist University, which is now Houston Christian University, consulted on the side, and then consulted with this energy software firm. They couldn't keep me totally billable, So I said,
Mm-hmm.
look, I can do a lot of other consulting. I'll do that, and whatever money I make, I'll give to you guys. Okay. And because I had a stock thing, I didn't want to get nuked.
Yep.
We did that. And Michael, when I came back after a 7-year absence of Chevron, I was a guru because I mean, I'm a pretty smart guy, but the difference is I had worked with different industries, done some really cool stuff, learned from other consultants. I mean, I was so much more valuable. And I finally learned how to listen a little bit better
Right.
instead of talk. And I had like a double, triple bump when I came back in.
Wow. Nice. And so there's still a few questions for you, but we're getting close to the end of our conversation. How can people get in touch with you?
Oh, well, it's website, kevinjlewisphd.com. And then go to LinkedIn. Okay.
Okay.
And if you want to do a search, just search for Teams, Tools, and Trials on Amazon or a book. You'll see the book. You can find me. Yep.
Right. Now, we had talked briefly before we started recording about the cruise from New Orleans all
This is
those
a
years ago.
it's a really good story. It's a God story. So that group that I worked for after the nonprofit doing the giving away free booze and cigarettes, I'm not too proud of it. That's where I was. I got fired from that organization because they were kind of sleazy, and I let people know what I thought about them. So I got taken out. And this is before the web. This is before cell phones, a long time ago. But I looked in the mirror and I said, oh, and I had $2,000 in debt, okay, credit card debt. I'd been unemployed for 6 months, and basically, you know, got the phone would ring and it was Chevron. So I made a vow to myself: if I ever get fired again or laid off, I will be so networked and skilled it'll just be a nuisance. Right now on the cruise from New Orleans. So when I was in New Orleans, I started a PhD at the University of New Orleans, great school, and then a guy from Houston came in and interviewed me. I'd done a workshop in Houston. He liked me, and they offered me a job. This is internal from that upstream part of Chevron to a technology company, right, in Houston.
Right.
So I said, great. So a friend of mine at Tulane University said, there's a really good program at Austin. You can commute from Houston. I applied for it, got accepted. And I mean, UT Austin, I mean, much obviously more rigorous school.
Hmm.
UNO's great, but I mean, come on, UT Austin's a great school. So I was accepted and was waiting for the offer and waiting and waiting. 9 months, okay, about almost exactly 9 months after, I was supposed to move. Uh, I got an email, or no, a letter from actual snail mail from Tech UT saying, "Well, you missed the deadline, you know, so I had been accepted, but you missed the cohort. You got to
Hmm.
wait a whole another year." And I'm going, "Oh man, this is what a bummer." And I had faith. I was hoping God was going to take care of me. So about 2 o'clock, it's a Friday afternoon, 2 o'clock. This is when faxes were still a big deal. This fax shows up, and here's my offer: more money, a promotion, full-time assistant, and we will support your getting your degree. I looked at that and I went, this is great. And then an hour and a half later, I met my wife down at the port of New Orleans, and we were on a cruise down the mouth of Mississippi to Cozumel. So my line is, God is never late, but he's seldom early. But you talk about patience. Michael, I
Yeah.
still don't have a lot of it, but it was a wonderful day. It was a great day.
Oh, that's good. Okay, so patience is one trait, but if you had to strip away everything, uh, what are the 3 most critical things a leader must do every single day to be effective?
I'll tell you what my industrial psychologist mentor said
Okay.
to me, said the number one thing leaders, especially C-suite, is self-management. And I said to him, what does that mean? He said, Kevin, are you good to anybody if you're sick or dead?
Hmm.
Well, I said, well, no. He said, the CEOs, the top leaders, they feel guilty taking care of themselves. But if they don't, who's going to lead the organization? You know,
Yes.
nutrition, exercise, sleep, all that kind of stuff, spiritual, you name it. So you've got self-management, I think is absolutely key. Also, a humble spirit,
Hmm.
humility, you know,
Hmm.
you're not God. Don't believe your press releases. Be open to feedback. I mean, I get plenty of feedback from my wife. I don't know if you're married or not too,
Yes.
but that's
Absolutely.
unsolicited, helpful feedback. And it's great. I need it, but you really need it in the organization as well.
Right. So we'll just end off with a question about your book. What was the most valuable lesson that maybe a toxic leader taught you that you still use today in coaching?
Orson Welles was known as the greatest film director ever, Citizen Kane, right? Now, there's some greatness now. But he said one time, I became a great director by watching bad movies.
Hmm.
So with every terrible leader that I had, I do exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
So you know what to do. You don't do that. You do the opposite. First of all, you support your people. You know, if you don't support your people, nothing's going to happen. I mean, they might work for you, but people don't leave companies; they leave bosses, right?
Hmm.
And if you support your people, I will walk through fire to support a manager that will support his or her subordinates in
Hmm.
development. You've got to let them go. Don't hold it back because it's gonna bite you
Right.
eventually.
Yes. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for this delightful, in depth, and candid conversation. Thank you so much for being here today.
You're very welcome. I'm candid, so the book. So appreciate it, Michael. Take care.
Oh, my pleasure. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening and you feel like your team is busy, but maybe not actually moving that needle, you might need to get aligned. And maybe we could say that Kevin is the business HR chiropractor that can realign that spine of your business. He's put together a brilliant 5-step framework to help you align your team's goals and your organization strategy. You can download that free guide at his website, kevinjlewisphd.com, and that little forward slash with a line. Stop being a square peg in that round hole and start delivering those results that really matter. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing and your likes and subscribes. Until next time, please seize your day, enjoy those sunrises and sunsets and all those beautiful adventures in between. I'm Michael Klassen. I'll see you next time on the 5am podcast. Thanks for watching the show. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com. 5am Podcast is brought to you in part by mkci.ca, a certified member of the Autodesk Developer Network. MKCI helps companies maximize their AutoCAD, Inventor, Navisworks, and other design software investments. Their innovative products like the CommandSys script editor and the Clash Management Suite will streamline your workflow and boost your productivity. Visit mkci.ca today to discover how they can enhance your competitive CAD advantage. That's mkci.ca. Thank you for your support of 5am Podcast.